Hello, AP Environmental, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Environmental Systems. So, this will be a very quick story, so gather around the pond, my little tadpoles, as we venture into environmental systems. In this environmental systems unit, we're going to discuss two things: systems and matter, and then energy flows and feedbacks. By the end of the systems and matter video, you should be able to describe how matter is comprised of atoms and molecules and how they move differently among systems, explain why water is an important component of most environmental systems, and thirdly, be able to discuss how matter is conserved in a chemical and a biological system. And it's not just surface tension, but water has a lot of significant properties in interacting with not only the biotic process that goes on in life, but also the abiotic process as well. So to give you the big grown-up version of what surface tension means, it is a property of water that results from the cohesion of the water molecules at the surface of the body of water, and it creates kind of like a skin, which is kind of a bad term, but like a skin on the surface of the water. A strong cohesion. One of the cool things that it also will do is a capillary action, and you might have remembered the term meniscus. All right, so the property of water that occurs when adhesion of water molecules to a surface is stronger than the cohesion between the actual water molecules itself. So when water likes the sides of the container more so than it likes itself, it experiences capillary action, and we call that adhesion. Cohesion is how water interacts with itself and holds itself together. So, all right, you remember the 99 times, hopefully, that we did this when you were in science classes when you were little, water droplets on a penny. Well, the forming of the dome-shaped water on top of the penny is a cohesion property. The molecules that are holding against the side of the penny, we call that an adhesion property. So when you put water into a graduated cylinder and it forms this little dip right here, it's experiencing a adhesion property. All right, and then on a penny, all the water molecules up here, that's a cohesion property. All right, anyway, so the Earth's surface, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. And many substances rely on this one factor. So the two unusual properties of water, the water has the ability to cohere and adhere, underlines these two unusual properties called surface tension and capillary action. You can see here on the diagram on the left that not all compounds, liquids, they behave like water. Water is unique in that it experiences capillary action and adhesion. If you were to compare it to mercury, you can see from the diagram it's very different in how one liquid responds to the size of the container versus the other side. The hydrogen bonding between water molecules creates the surface tension that's necessary to support this water strider. And if you look at him, you can see his feet. There's a variety of different kinds of water striders, and they all have a different, like a little tiny foot structure. No, foot's probably a bad word, but a little foot structure that keeps them above the actual surface of the water. And if you were to look at it from the side, you can see where his feet are taking advantage of the cohesion and adhesion properties of water. And although we don't often think of water as generally being sticky, hydrogen bonding makes water molecules stick together very, very strongly to one another. And this hydrogen bonding also makes water molecules stick strongly to other substances, as adhesion, as to the side of the container or to something else. Hopefully you've seen a creature like this walk across water. He's taking advantage of surface tension. Surface tension also makes those water droplets smooth and more or less like spherical as they cling to the water faucet, as it drips out of the water faucet. And we can also see capillary action, the adhesion of water molecules to a surface that is stronger than the cohesion between the actual molecules itself, like in terms of a paper towel. So every time you spill something and you go and get a paper towel, you might call it wicking. You can see the capillary action as the water is soaked up through the vessels that are inside of the cellulose material that the paper towel is made out of. And again, this just becomes extremely important because what's demonstrated in the paper towel wicking situation is exactly what any tree or plant needs to do to survive. And it's important for plants to transport water, from the ground to through the trunk, through the leaves, and as well as any other type of like dissolved minerals. And it does this through a capillary action process. All right, so with moving on, in addition to those properties, another thing that's really special to just water is that it actually takes up more space in a solid form than it actually does in a liquid form. So in the figure here on the top left, you can see this other unique property of water. I mean, it takes up a larger volume in a solid when it forms ice, than it does in a liquid form. And this difference in molecular structure between this liquid and ice is has a really, really unique property you probably don't know of. So as water cools, it becomes denser until it reaches 4 degrees Celsius. That temperature at which water reaches its maximum density. As it cools from 4 degrees C down to freezing, down to 0 degrees C, its molecules actually realign into a crystal lattice type of structure, and the volume of it actually starts to expand. So you can see this as a result anytime you add ice cube to a drink. Ice floats on liquid water. So what does this unique property of water mean for life on Earth? Imagine what would have happened if water acted like most other liquids. Like as it cooled, it would just continue to become denser and denser and denser. But as a solid form of ice, it floats. And really up until now, most students think that, well, as it starts to cool and expand, it grabs onto air molecules and creates that structure. But actually, that is just not true. It actually starts to realign its crystal structure and start to physically take on a different molecular structure form. So to a biologist, what does this mean? It means that when water in a lake, all right, starts to cool as winter approaches and it becomes colder, it starts to sink at the lakes and ponds and streams alike. All right, water would freeze from the bottom up, and as a result, very few aquatic organisms would be able to survive in cold temperatures if water was like freezing like most other liquids. But at 4 degrees Celsius, what we actually see is inside of a lake or a pond, when water is approaching 4 degrees C, it actually starts to turn. So the very, very dense water system does start to come all the way down to the actual bottom of the lake and start to turn. It picks up all the debris and detritus that's actually at the bottom and starts to manipulate its crystal structure and move back upward. So we actually see this cycling of nutrients when a lake or a pond hits 4 degrees Celsius. And we'll talk about that in our aquatic unit and at lengthy detail, I'm sure. So thankfully this is the case, right? Because when it starts to become winter and nutrients are at a rarity, water cools to 4 degrees Celsius and starts to mix a lake or a pond. And as it's mixing, it brings up with it nutrients. And when it starts to freeze, the freezing components, the crystal structures start to form at the top. So that's why you can ice fish. Is the frozen part, the coldest part, is on top of the water, and then life continues underneath. So if water at a liquid, at a solid, acted like any other component on Earth, any other liquid on Earth, it would not do this. It would freeze from the bottom up, and we would just freeze out and kill everything in a pond or in a lake. But it doesn't. It has this really cool, fascinating property that brings to life all nutrients when it gets very, very cold, and allows life to live through the winter.